Yeah, the shanty, the way Dad put it together and built it, it actually worked very well. We were pretty happy with the way it performed when we were in open water. We had no problem. It did exactly what it's supposed to do, and Dad did a great job putting it together. It was light enough with the aluminum railing and the tarp. We didn't have to get off the boat. We could sleep right on the boat with the tents that we had set up.
Yeah, I think in still water and open water, I think the 5-horse motor would have been sufficient, because with the pontoons and the canoe, we're sitting pretty high on the water, and no problem with maneuvering when the water was calm and in eddies and things when we pulled in for the night. We had no problem with managing how to control it and the movement of it, but it was in that swift water and so many stick-ups and stuff were the problem.
Day one, we took off in the morning, and we had a 5-horsepower motor on the shanty, and within a couple hundred yards, we ran into a log jam, or stick-ups, what we call them, were logs in the middle, and with a 5-horsepower motor, it wasn't strong enough to fight the current, and so our 10-foot shanty would get hung up on those. We had never spent a lot of time on White River except out in front of my dad's house, which is the small creek Bean Blossom that runs into White River. And so the only time we were on White River would have been just a half a mile up or down from where he lives. And it was wide and usually deep enough. I never even dreamed that it was going to be so shallow that
I always stood on the boat with a rope, and I'd throw the rope to him. He'd grab the rope with one hand and hold on to the chainsaw with the other, and I'd drag him to the boat. And I'm sure if the authorities saw what I was allowing my son to do, they'd lock me up for child neglect. But anyhow, we managed to pry and cut our way through.
a lot of my time for the first day was out of the boat with a rope over my shoulder, walking either on the bank to guide the pontoon in the deeper water or the shanty, or in the middle of the water, walking on the sandbar where it was at ankle to knee deep. I'm sure the first day I walked 3 or 4 miles with the shanty over my shoulder, and then at the end of the day we stopped I think it was probably about maybe 7 or 8 miles is all we got the first day, and our propeller was completely eaten up from hitting sandbars and stick-ups. I was able to get my brother on the phone, Bob, and he actually brought us, we had a spare, we didn't even think about bringing a spare because we weren't prepared for the mess that we were getting in. And so he met us about 8 miles, or about 20 miles from Dad's house, 8 miles probably river, and we put a new propeller on the boat. The first night we'd already went through one.
Well, we had a choice. A lot of times when we knew that the boat wasn't going to get through, we had a choice: either hit the sandbar or the log jam. And if we knew if we got up on the sandbar, it'd take us forever to drag it off because it's so heavy. So we hit the log jams, and with the current, we hit it pretty hard. And a lot of times we was able to use our hands and pry poles to break part of the log jam away so we could float on through. And then there was other times that when we couldn't do that, Barry would lean over the boat with a chainsaw and cut some of the drift away where it'd break loose and we could float on further. And then there was times when he couldn't do that, he'd get out in the water. Sometimes water was up to above his waist, and he'd use a chainsaw. And then there was times when the water was too deep, he'd get out on the log jam And if it wasn't solid enough to hold him, he'd set a straddle of a log and use a chainsaw to cut us through. But it was a headache at the beginning, almost to the end of White River, because of the stuff that was piled up and wouldn't allow us passage.
And that first day was a duplicated about 6 days after that. The same thing every day. We got a little better at catching where the sandbars were and shutting the motor off and getting out before we hit them. But the problem with some of the log jams is that we couldn't get away from them because the water was so swift. It would just push us into them. And I'd be trying to lift the boat off one of the log jams, cutting it with a chainsaw, worried about Dad trying to get out in the swift water. But for the first 6 days, it was nothing but a lot of work. And I know, like the second or third day, I probably walked the pontoon or the shanty. I probably walked it 7 miles down the river.
Here we are getting ready to take off day 3. This is the Eel River running into the White River. All those stick-ups, that's what we get to go through. It has been a long 3 days. Thought we would make 15, 20 miles a day on White River. We've been making about 7 miles a day. Crazy how shallow it is and how many stick-up and limbs and logs that are in the way.
There was one day that when we got downstream quite a ways, we run into a couple fishermen, and they told us of a log jam that had piled up against the old railroad trestle downstream a little ways that would be impossible for us to get that shanty through.
But when they said that the log jam you couldn't get through, our motor finally quit in that process of getting to the log jam, and we were able to stop at White River Rentals right off of White River. Really nice people, nice guy, and he told us we could sit on his dock, and then that's when we took the boat down to check out the log jam, and he said you can't get through it. I looked at it, I thought, well, it'd take us 3 weeks to get through that. And so we went back to White River Rentals on their boat dock and started trying to decide what we were going to do. We'd already realized that the handmade shanty we put together was not going to make it all the way to New Orleans. So we started looking and figured that we need to break this down because there was no way to get through it, so we had to break the boat down. And in the process of breaking the boat down, we realized that two of our pontoons were full of water. And so we realized that we needed to make a different arrangement. And while we're sitting on the dock, I called a friend of mine, Steve Hansen, who works for Browning's Marina, and worked out a deal with him to buy a pontoon and have it delivered to Dad's house. And that was on the 6th day when we broke everything down, and then Mom came down and got us, and we loaded everything up and came back to Dad's house.
When we was tearing down the shanty boat, and Barry's friend came to help haul it away. We brought the truck and the trailer, the boat trailer, and Bob, my son, brought his flatbedded truck. And when Ann came down, she and Barry went to town for supplies, and I finished tearing the boat down. And when Ann came back, she brought me a Subway sandwich, and all I've had for 7 days was campfire food. So that Subway sandwich was the best sandwich I ever had, and I need to thank Ann again for being so considerate and sweet.
Well, we got our john boat hung up on about a 200-foot sandbar, and in the process I did something pretty silly. I tried to jump in the boat after I started the motor standing on the sandbar, and it kind of got a hold of me. So it's a word to the wise, don't try to start your motor while you're standing behind it. And it's not as bad as it looks. Well, maybe it is, but I think we'll be fine. Dad's more worried about it than I am.
So when before we got to the log jam, our motor stopped working completely. It just had taken such a beating that it stopped, and a guy came by in a, what do you call those, an airboat, and we asked him if he could help us, and we went just another 100 yards. They had a place called White River Rentals, and he let us dock on, or take the boat to that dock. He helped me get the chainsaw started, and then made some calls of anything that we needed, and they're so kind. They were just great people, and he let us sleep there. Anything we wanted to do, we slept there on the dock for that night to try to decide what we were going to do next. And but yeah, they were great people. White River Rentals. Yeah, it seemed like every time we had trouble or something went wrong, there was somebody there to help us throughout the entire trip, and like little angels stashed all over the place for us, and White River Rentals was one of them. In fact, they took a picture of us at their dock, and that went viral on Facebook, and I didn't know much about Facebook at that time, and I hadn't planned on doing anything or putting anything on Facebook. And that went all the way down the Mississippi River to different people, and somebody actually sent me a face message asking me if she could document the entire trip for us. And what a blessing Lori was. She actually was a pilot, helicopter pilot, and knew the Mississippi River probably as well as anybody. And when she contacted me, we had Lori Darling start helping us. I'd give her updates on a daily basis, and she wrote our Facebook page for us. And it was a blessing from that point on to have, because she helped me maneuver a lot of places that I didn't even know where I was going. Yeah, when we finally got stopped and realized we couldn't get through the log jam, started taking the shanty apart, and the pontoons were full of water, we were pretty disappointed because we had really visioned taking that all the way, and it was set up exactly the way we needed it, had all of our equipment on it, had enough equipment for at least 2 months, and it was disappointing we had to take it down, but we realized that it just was not going to be seaworthy. And when we hit the Mississippi, especially with all the ships that they have going through there, so we knew we needed something with a little bigger motor to maneuver, and something that could handle sandbars a little better.
When we was taking it apart, I was thinking all the work I'd put into it, putting it together, and then I found out that we wasn't going to be able to use it all the way. Yeah, it was disappointing, and it was a lot of work tearing it apart, but more so putting it together and making arrangements for all of our equipment we needed. And yeah, it was a disappointment.
But I was determined. I was going to Mississippi, all the way down to Mississippi in that thing once we started. Yeah, the Paytons don't give up very easy. We're pretty stubborn. We go fishing and take tartar sauce because we're catching Moby Dick. So we were determined. We knew we were going to get there. It just depended on how and what we needed to do to get there. But I was getting Dad to the Mississippi River one way or the other if I had to carry him. Or he was going to carry me one way or the other. We were getting there.